Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another solved case. If you are new here, I do mostly Australian true crime cases, and today we're going to be focusing on the case of Lauren, Barry and Nichole Collins. These names may not be familiar to you, but the case is more commonly known as the Bega Schoolgirl killings. So let's get straight into today's case. So we're starting today's case on October the 3rd, which was a Friday, in 1997 in the very small town of Bega, New South Wales in Australia. Bega is about 430 kilometres or 267 miles south of Sydney, and it's also famous for its Bega cheese. In 1997, Bega was considered a very safe town to live and raise a family, and as of a 2016 census, their population was only 4,600, which I understand isn't the 1997 population, but I could not find how many people lived there in 97, but we can assume it was quite a bit less than that. So it was a very small, close and a tight-knit town. So at a place called White Rock in the village of Cammalleri, which was just near Bega, Graham Collins, who was the father of 16-year-old Nichole Collins, was setting up a campsite for his daughter and her friends. Nichole was born on November the 14th, 1980, and lived in a small village in Camilleri, which at the time had a population of approximately 400 people. She attended the local Bega High School and was in year 11 at the time. Nichole was described as a very friendly and a very outgoing girl, always on the go and always full of energy. Nichole's father was setting up this campsite so Nichole and her friends could enjoy the upcoming Labor Day long weekend. And the campsite was located about 3 kilometres or 1.9 miles from Nichole's family home, just for reference. So on October the 4th, which was the Saturday, was the beginning of Nichole and her friends' campout weekend. Her very close or her best friend, I couldn't really clarify which from my research, but regardless, they were very close friends. Lauren Margaret Barry was going to be attending the campout, along with Rebecca Campbell, Sarah Darcy, and Lauren's brother Nathan, and as well as a few others. Her close friend Lauren Barry was 14 years old and attended the same high school as Nichole, which was Bega High School, and was in year 9. And despite the girls' 2-year age gap, they were incredibly close. Lauren was born on October the 11th, 1982, which meant her 15th birthday was only days away. So the campout with her friends doubled up as an early birthday party and celebration with her closest friends and her family as well that were really close by. Lauren, unlike her very outgoing friend Nichole, was more easygoing and low-key. She was described as a homebody who loved spending time at home with her family, which were her parents and her brother Nathan. She was a calm soul and described as a sweet girl who was kind and generous to others. Lauren was also very close to her brother Nathan Barry, who was 17 at the time, and they did fight like a typical brother and sister, but they always really made up very quickly. Nathan described Lauren as his best mate. During the campout, Nichole and her friends would regularly check in at her family home to shower, change clothes, and grab some food. Nichole and Lauren's parents would also regularly check in at the campsite just to make sure everyone was doing okay. Although the group of friends were considered trustworthy and responsible, they were, after all, still a group of young teenagers. So on the Sunday evening, which was the 5th of October, the group of teens were sitting around the campfire, chatting and listening to music. Nichole had actually been a little bit upset that evening. She'd recently broken up with her boyfriend, and she had expected her boyfriend to actually drop by the campfire, but at that point in the night, it did not appear as though he would be doing so. Nichole decided to go visit him in an attempt to talk things over. She knew where her boyfriend was, which was at a nearby party 8 kilometers away in the town of Jalla, I think it's pronounced. Nichole did plan to walk there despite the 8-kilometer distance because This was really the only way the teens got around, and it was a small town, everything was close together, and most importantly, it was considered a safe place to walk around as a teenager, even late at night. Furthermore, they were in a remote area, so there wasn't really anyone around, and these group of teens were really brought up with the notion of trust, especially being in such a small town in New South Wales. Lauren, not wanting to leave her good friend to walk so far alone at night time by herself, because that would probably be quite boring, she told Nichole she would come with her. At around 9 p.m. that night, Lauren and Nichole walked off together from the campsite, and this would be the last time Lauren and Nichole's friends and family ever saw them alive again. At around 10 p.m. that night, the two girls were walking along the Bega Schoolgirl road in Evans Hill when a car, a Ford Telstar, stopped to offer the two girls a lift. In the car were two males, 28-year-old Lesley Camilleri and 23-year-old Lindsay Beckett. Lauren and Nichole talked to the two men, who appeared quite friendly, for a short period of time before jumping in their back seat, but not before room actually had to be made for the girls to fit in the back seat. A bright pink portable television set was sitting on the back seat of their car, which was kind of an unusual item. So the two men removed the television, put it on the side of the road and left it there. The group of four then drove to Tathra Beach, where they hung out, talked, the boys or the men had some drinks before the two girls decided they wanted to return to their campsite at White Rock. The older of the men, Camilleri, happily offered to drive the two girls back to where they came from, their campsite, so the four piled back into the car and made their way there. Back at the campsite, Nathan Barry, Lauren's older brother, had returned back to the campsite at around 10 past 10 that evening and noticed his sister and Nichole were missing, but didn't really think anything of it. The next morning, Nathan Barry is the first camper to awaken, and he immediately notices that the girls, Lauren and Nichole, are still missing. Nathan immediately goes back to the house to ask if anyone has seen Lauren and Nichole. Nathan's parents, Garrett and Cheryl Barry, tell their son they haven't seen either of the girls and that the girls are supposed to be with him at the campsite. Cheryl Barry immediately starts calling around to see if anyone has seen the girls or heard from the girls since the night before. And Garrett Barry goes straight to the campsite to speak to the other teenagers to see if anyone knows what happened to Lauren and Nichole. Rebecca Campbell tells Garrett that the two girls headed to Jalla Jalla the night before at around 9 p.m. to visit Nichole's ex-boyfriend at a party, and they were probably just staying at Nichole's house that night. The girls, however, were not at Nichole's house or anywhere else that their friends and family could think of. Lauren and Nichole were reported missing to police by midday that day, and it was quickly established the girls were not runaways. Meanwhile, on that same morning, a local council worker spots a rather unusual item sitting on the side of the road, and this is the same road that Lauren and Nichole met the two men on. And of course, that item is the bright pink television set. He loads the unusual looking TV onto his truck, and the council worker didn't know it at the time, but that TV set would become a vital clue in the disappearance of Lauren and Nichole. The local council worker stops by a local refuge centre that same morning to drop the TV into a recycle bin. However, he finds the recycle bin is full and he places the television on the ground. A few hours later, that same television is found by a scavenger. This scavenger takes it home, paints it black, and sells it to a local hotel. So back to the disappearance of Lauren and Nichole. Friends, family, and state emergency services were all out in force looking for the two young girls. As the search expands, SES and volunteers do a detailed sweep of the bushland. And search teams are eventually joined by a mounted police and the dog squad. The search for Lauren and Nichole was really a huge effort on behalf of everyone involved. Everyone in the community was really helping out in any way and every way that they could. And even Lauren's brother Nathan was driving around, going to any spots that the girls would frequent, looking for any clues, and driving along local highways trying to find any sign that the girls had been in those locations. On the first day of the search, a local resident finds some abandoned clothing on a dirt road near the campsite. It's a girl's top and a checkered flannelette shirt. The items are soon identified as belonging to Lauren Barry, and police return these items to her parents, and her mother puts the clothing items away, unaware that these pieces of clothing hold vital evidence in their disappearance. The family also holds a vigil, praying for the girls' safe return, but many fear the worst. Both Lauren and Nichole's parents make a public plea for any information on their girls' disappearances, as this story is really picked up in the media and the public do come forward with information that could relate to the case. So a local mother actually comes forward and says she was driving through Tathra at about 10 to 10 on the night the girls disappeared, and she notices a car parked on the side of the highway. She's unable to pass the vehicle safely, so she has to stop. And in the bright lights of her headlights, she notices a man speaking to two young girls. She gets a pretty clear look at the man, and it's enough to describe him to police. The car eventually moves, and the local mother is able to move past the vehicle safely and continue on her journey. Another witness actually comes forward saying they spotted a bright pink television set abandoned on the side of the road on the night that the girls went missing, which at the time may have seemed like a pretty pointless piece of information, but it wasn't. The search is eventually scaled back, and the investigation team is scaled down to 4 detectives. A month soon passes since the girls' disappearance, and no new or helpful leads are coming through. That is until the names of 2 career criminals are put in front of the detectives on the case, and that is Lesley Camilleri and Lindsay Beckett, both from the town of Yass in New South Wales. And with their criminal history and past convictions between the two of them, the pair seem to be a good fit to be possibly involved in Lauren and Nichole's disappearances. The police in Yass saw the case of Lauren and Nichole being missing in Bega and decided to pass on everything that they knew about Camilleri and Beckett to the Bega investigators on the case. A detective in Yass also heard Camilleri and Beckett say something to each other to the effect of, "Watch the police blame Lauren and Nichole's disappearance on us." Not only did this detective find this weird for the two to say out of the blue, like they hadn't been accused at this point, they literally said it for no reason, but that detective happened to know that Camilleri and Beckett were both in Bega when the girls went missing. Police also discover that Camilleri had recently, like very recently, faced court on 6 counts of indecent assault against an 11-year-old girl, but had walked free when the trial was aborted on a legal technicality. Camilleri and Beckett were also under investigation for the abduction and indecent assault of 19-year-old Rosemarie Gandarius. And this happened just this past September, or just the past September of 1997, which was weeks before Lauren and Nichole disappeared. Rosemarie had been abducted in Canberra, Australia by two men who violently assaulted her and threatened her with a knife to do as the two men said. During her ordeal at a rest stop off of a highway, Rosa Marie asks if she can go to the toilet, and the two men, believing that she's too scared to try anything, let her go to the toilet alone. And this is where Rosa Marie bravely runs for her life. The two men actually do spot Rosa Marie running and try to run after her, but are unsuccessful. Rosa Marie hides until the men give up and leave, and then goes to fetch for help. However, Rosa Marie eventually makes the decision not to make a statement against the two men when the two men both come forward, stating that the whole incident was consensual and was in exchange for drugs. And because no statement or charges were laid, the two men escaped the whole incident scot-free. On the 25th of October, which was 20 days since Lauren and Nichole disappeared, the Bega police get a call from Canberra police with the news that Lindsay Beckett has been arrested after they chased a stolen vehicle that he was in possession of. In the vehicle, police find maps of the Bega area along with various items belonging to Beckett, and they also find some blood-stained clothing in the boot of the car. Bega detectives head to Canberra to analyse the evidence and interview Lindsay Beckett. On the way to the interview, one of the detectives, looking through all the evidence thus far in paperwork, comes up with an interesting theory when he spots the seemingly insignificant little detail about a bright pink television set. He thought it would make sense if Beckett had been travelling with this bright pink television set in the back of his car, and in order to get Lauren and Nichole into the back seat, he would have to remove the television set from the back seat and discard of it on the side of the road. And the detective travelling with him kind of just brushed off the theory and thought it was pretty irrelevant to the whole case. When police finally interview Beckett, he comes off as very arrogant and seems very unfazed and uninterested in the whole situation. Towards the end of the interview, one of the detectives asks Beckett if he had a pink television set in the back of his car, and Beckett jolts upright and stiffens. He doesn't actually say much about the pink television set, but he says he had a television set in the back of his car, but he doesn't know what happened to it. And at this point, Lesley Camilleri is actually in custody in Goulburn, New South Wales, after being arrested under a completely different incident. Camilleri is soon interviewed following his arrest, and when he's asked about the pink television set, he refuses to answer any more questions. Meanwhile, Lindsay Beckett, who is still in custody, is questioned by police for the second time. This time, police tell Beckett that they can link him to Nichole Collins and Lauren Barry's disappearances. Detectives also put a large A4 image of the two girls, Lauren and Nichole, in front of Beckett, and he immediately turns the image over. At this point in the interview, Beckett asks to take a smoke break. And while outside with the guard, he bursts into tears, telling the guard, "They've got us, they've got us." Beckett is marched back into the interview room where he asks for a map. He says, "I'll tell you where they are." He looks at the map for a moment before pointing to Fiddler's Green Creek in Victoria. Lindsay Beckett then gives police a full and detailed confession about the abductions and killings of Lauren Barry and Nichole Collins. Meanwhile, Lesley Camilleri is still in custody, and he's interviewed once again, where he's informed about Beckett's confession. Camilleri denies any involvement in the girls' killings, stating that on the night that the girls were abducted, he was in a drug-induced stupor and couldn't even remember most of the night. He states to the police, We picked up the girls and went to the beach. I shot up heroin behind the shed. While the girls were drinking, I was trying to OD. We drove around with the girls. I was asleep most of the time. Beckett later told me he had dropped both the girls off at home. I remember waking up and seeing the girls. We were parked in the bush. I asked Beckett where we were and he said Victoria on the main road somewhere. I went off my head. I told him to go home. Get the hell out of there. Then I saw him walking out of the bush. He had blood all over him. Told me he cut his finger. On Wednesday the 12th of November, just 2 weeks after his initial arrest, Lindsay Beckett leads police to the crime scene at Fiddler's Green Creek, where they find the decomposing remains of Lauren Barry and Nichole Collins. It has been 6 weeks since their disappearance. Shane Box was one of the police officers on the investigation of Lauren and Nichole, and he was also there when the girls' bodies were discovered. And Shane Box also happened to become very close to the families of Lauren and Nichole. Box is unfortunately the one to deliver the tragic news to both the girls' families. And Shane, being a father of 2 girls himself, cries when telling the families the tragic news that the girls have been found and they are not alive. Sadly, the worst is yet to come when family and investigators hear the horrific details of the night of terror the girls endured. Meanwhile, thousands of people attend the memorial service in Bega for Lauren and Nichole, pretty much shutting down the whole town. At the same time, police have charged Lindsay Beckett and Lesley Camilleri with the abduction, indecent assault and killings of Nichole Collins and Lauren Barry. So I'm going to briefly talk a bit about Camilleri and Beckett. Lesley Camilleri was born in 1969, making him 28 years old at the time, to a family of 6 siblings in Liverpool, New South Wales. He was considered an uncontrollable child, spending a lot of his childhood in and out of juvenile detention, and he didn't meet his biological father until he was 13 years old. Between the ages of 10 and 12, after escaping juvenile detention, Camilleri lived on the streets of King's Cross in Sydney. Camilleri was eventually returned to juvenile detention and remained there until he was 15 years old. Camilleri had 146 other convictions to his name before being charged with the deaths of Lauren and Nichole. I really couldn't find that much about Lindsay Beckett, but I did find that he was 23 years old at the time, and he was born in 1974. He had known Camilleri for a couple of years because they often stole cars together, and Beckett was actually born in New Zealand before moving to Australia as a child. He had multiple convictions of robbery and assault before the charges relating to Lauren and Nichole, and he was described as someone with a low IQ. So now I'm going to discuss what really did happen on the night of Lauren and Nichole's abduction, keeping in mind this does come from the mouth of Lindsay Beckett. He did give police a full and detailed confession. Whether that is the complete and whole truth, we don't know, so keep that in mind, but I'm now going to run you through the alleged events of that night. So at around 10 p.m. on the night that Lauren and Nichole disappeared, Camilleri and Beckett are driving a car, the Ford Telstar, and this car actually belongs to Camilleri's de facto partner. Camilleri had had an argument with his de facto partner earlier that day and had been telling his mate Beckett about how depressed he was about the whole situation. The two friends had been drinking beer that day and been injecting each other with amphetamines in an effort to forget their problems. Camilleri and Beckett are driving just aimlessly that night along the Bega Tathra Road, and Camilleri is the driver that night and Beckett is in the passenger seat when they spot 2 young girls walking single file along the road. and that was Lauren Barry and Nichole Collins. The men do a U-turn and pull their car over next to the girls. So the last that Lauren and Nichole's friends heard from them back at the campsite that night at around 9 p.m. was that they were heading to Jala Jala to see Nichole's ex-boyfriend. However, according to Beckett, they made no mention of this, and as far as we know, they never did make it to Jala Jala. The men had a brief chat with Lauren and Nichole about an upcoming local music festival before offering them a lift to a beach party at Tathra Beach. As far as we know, the girls willingly got into the pair's car, but not before the bright pink television was removed from the back seat and discarded on the side of the road to make room for the girls. It should be noted that the girls' families do not believe in any way, shape or form that the girls willingly got into the car that night. And I mean, to me as well, it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't really matter what I think. It's the fact that friends and family are pretty damn certain, and even some police officers are quite certain the girls did not willingly get into that car, but regardless, they got into that car that night one way or another. It should be noted as well that the witness that drove past them that night, the local mother, did just spot them having a casual conversation. They didn't see any violence or a struggle or any fear, but again, once that witness drove off, we don't know what happened. So the story behind the pink television set was that it was an item that the pair had picked up earlier that day in lieu of some drug debt they were owed. The group got in the car and drove the 5 kilometers to Tathra Beach, where they hung out for a bit before driving back to the girls' campsite in White Rock. Along the gravel road leading up to the campsite, Camilleri becomes quite unsettled at the scraping of the very bumpy, gravelly road under his car and becomes angry about it at Lauren and Nichole, despite them having no control over the conditions of the road. Lauren and Nichole, who are stuck in the back seat of this car, terrified and cannot escape despite being so close to their campsite. Both the rear doors have been child locked, so the girls cannot open the doors from the inside, and the window winders have also been removed, so there is really no way for them to get out. At this point, Lesley Camilleri pulls out a knife and threatens Lauren and Nichole, telling them to shut up and do as he says, and tells them if they did anything else besides that they would both be stabbed. Lindsay Beckett also produces a knife at the instruction of his dominant friend and shows the girls. Beckett simply tells the girls to do as Camilleri has said. At this point, Camilleri reverses his car away from the campsite and drives towards Old Wallagoot Road. Along Wallagoot Road, the men pull up next to a rubbish tip, and at this point the girls are still very close to their home in Cammalleri. Both girls are indecently assaulted at this location, and Lauren, who is 14, still a virgin and menstruating at this time, begs to be left alone, but of course she is not. The girls are then loaded into the car again and driven further south through the small New South Wales town of Merimbula and onto Ben Boyd National Park, where Camilleri and Beckett continue to assault Lauren and Nichole. And 2 pieces of evidence are actually left at Ben Boyd National Park, probably unbeknownst to Beckett and Camilleri, and that is Lauren's flashlight and her tampon. Camilleri and Beckett also continue to inject amphetamines as the night wears on. The men continue driving through a town called Eden, where they make a brief stop and they switch driving positions, with Beckett now driving, and they continue on. At this point, Camilleri positions himself in the back seat and continues to assault Lauren. At some point in the drive, Camilleri actually falls asleep and Beckett continues to drive through the night. When Camilleri wakes up sometime later in the evening, he asks Beckett where they are, and Beckett says they're somewhere in Victoria, heading towards a place called Auburst, and Camilleri freaks out. He yells at Beckett, telling him he wanted to go to Sydney, which is back in the state of New South Wales, not in Victoria. Camilleri keeps telling Beckett he wants to go to the bridge. Beckett understands this as his friend telling him he wants to throw the girls off a bridge. Apparently, along the Hume Highway towards Sydney, there are a lot of bridges with a lot of, quote, great drops. The group continue their drive through the night towards Auburst, where they stop once again at a place called Wingen Point in Victoria, where the girls are again indecently assaulted. At this point, Lauren and Nichole actually begin to ask Beckett and Camilleri about their intentions of what they plan to do with them. No doubt the girls can probably hear their conversations about the bridges, and the girls straight up ask the two men, "Are you going to kill us?" Camilleri assures Lauren and Nichole that the two only plan to just leave them somewhere so they have a chance to escape. Beckett claims that at this time, Camilleri just kept repeating the words, "They can't go back, they can't go back," which he thought referred to the fact that the girls would have to be killed in order for the two men not to be identified. The group continued to drive through the night and into the early hours of the morning, before finally stopping at around 7 a.m. at a place called Fiddler's Green Creek, located just south of the Victorian border of New South Wales. At this point, both the girls have their hands bound and they are led by the two men through the rough and rugged terrain of Fiddler's Green Creek, along a remote bush track and up to the creek. The group walk along the creek bed for several hundred meters before Camilleri orders both the girls to remove their clothing, get in the creek and thoroughly wash themselves of any evidence of indecent assault. Both girls are then ordered to lie on their stomachs so they can be tied up and gagged. They are then separated from each other at a distance of about 30 meters or 98 feet. Lauren is hog-tied up near the creek bed and Nichole is tied up to a tree. Beckett and Camilleri at this point regroup, deciding what to do with the two girls. Camilleri eventually demands that Beckett is the one to drown both the girls in the creek, and Beckett initially protests this, saying that he shouldn't be the one to have to kill both the girls. But when Camilleri threatens to stab his friend if he doesn't do it, Beckett decides it is him or the girls' lives, and he chooses himself. Lindsay Beckett approaches Lauren Barry first and attempts to drown her in the creek, but he becomes enraged when, as she is flailing about, he gets his knee wet. In a fit of rage, he stabs Lauren in the side of the neck, accidentally cutting his finger in the process, and Lauren eventually stops moving. Beckett then makes his way over to Nichole, who is still tied up at the tree. Nichole could not visibly see what had happened to Lauren from where she was, but she likely heard the commotion of what had happened and had a pretty clear idea of what did happen and what was about to happen next. When Beckett approaches Nichole, Nichole says to him, "You're going to kill me, aren't you?" Beckett tells her to shut up before approaching her on the left side and slashing her throat several times. The severe injuries do not kill Nichole, and she is thrashing about on the ground attempting to scream, but no sound is coming out. Beckett begins to punch and kick Nichole when he realizes that she is not going to die as easily as Lauren did. He then puts his foot on Nichole to stop her from moving and stabs her in the throat, in the Adam's apple, where the knife gets stuck. Again, this injury does not stop Nichole from moving and thrashing about, and Beckett eventually gets the knife out of her throat. Beckett stabs her again on the left side of her chest, aiming for her heart. Beckett continues to kick Nichole in the head until she eventually slows down and stops moving. So Camilleri was not present during either of the girls' brutal killings. In fact, Camilleri was just waiting back in the car for Beckett to return. When Beckett gets back into the car, his friend turns to him and says, "Did you see the demon?" Camilleri drives away from the crime scene towards Canberra as Beckett falls asleep. The pair make a stop at the Theodore Lookout on Monero Highway. There, the pair destroy and dispose of evidence, including burning their blood-stained clothing and disposing of the ropes and ties used on both the girls. They then drive to the Commonwealth Avenue Bridge, still in Canberra, where they dispose of the knives they used to kill, that Beckett used to kill Lauren and Nichole, into Lake Burley Griffin before returning home to Yass. 2 days after the girls' killings, the pair spend 6 hours cleaning and washing their car, including removing car seats and the back seats, giving it probably the most thorough clean of its life. Then drive back to Canberra to destroy more evidence before returning to Bega, where they initially picked up the girls to retrieve the bright pink television they had left on the side of the road. However, despite their best search efforts, they cannot locate the TV, and Camilleri is fearful that the television could lead back to the pair in relation to Lauren and Nichole's disappearance, which of course it does. However, by this point, the television, unbeknownst to the two men, is long gone. So now to the trial of the two men. On the 26th of June 1998, Lindsay Beckett, who had actually confessed to killing Nichole Collins and Lauren Barry, appeared in court where he entered a plea of guilty. On the 20th of August 1998, Beckett is sentenced to life in prison and is given a non-parole period for his cooperation with the police of 35 years. And this is actually the longest non-parole period ever handed down to someone in Australia at this time. At the time of sentencing, Justice Vincent described Beckett as someone with a low IQ and someone who had fallen under the influence of an older individual of a much stronger personality. As Lindsay Beckett was led from the courtroom to begin his sentence, Lauren's mother yelled at him, "I hope you rot in hell." He will be 59 years old when he is eligible for parole in 2033. The trial for Lesley Camilleri started on the 15th of February 1999 and ran for 10 weeks and called on 180 witnesses. And it was a trial by jury. Evidence in court included a shirt belonging to Lauren Barry that had Camilleri's DNA on it, and this shirt was found at the rubbish tip at Old Woolagoot Road, which was the first stop that Beckett and Camilleri had made with the girls. In fact, investigators had actually found evidence at pretty much every single stop the two men made with Lauren and Nichole, despite their best efforts to destroy and get rid of any evidence. Lindsay Beckett was called to give evidence against his co-accused in the trial, and he spent 5 days in the witness box. This was also the first time that Lauren and Nichole's family were hearing the full extent and the full details of what the girls went through the night they were abducted. Camilleri did continue to blame Beckett, however, claiming that Beckett was solely responsible for the girls' deaths and that he was in a drug-induced stupor the whole night and barely even remembers the two girls. Rosa Marie Gandarius also testifies at the trial. The 19-year-old woman that was abducted and indecently assaulted by Beckett and Camilleri but they were never charged for this crime. And her testimony shocks everyone in the court. Lesley Camilleri is eventually found guilty by the jury after 2 days of deliberation, and on the 27th of April 1999 he is sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Camilleri repeatedly yawned as his sentence was being read, appearing bored, uninterested, and unremorseful for his crimes. At the sentencing, the judge remarked, quote, "Using the control which you clearly had over your weaker-willed but equally evil companion, Beckett, you instructed him to perform acts in a somewhat perverse way. It could be said that you probably did not possess the courage to perform yourself. It is terrible to contemplate the prospect that, as a consequence of the order which, in my view, justice of proper appreciation of sentencing principles would require in your case, you may never be released from prison. However, I consider that my duty is clear. Through your own actions, you have forfeited your right to ever walk amongst us again." Camilleri appealed his sentence twice, once in 2001 and once in 2002, and was denied both times. In jail, Camilleri has received death threats from multiple prisoners and remains in protective custody. He's in jail to this day and is currently 49 years old. So in 2012, Lesley Camilleri faced a new charge. He was charged with the abduction and killing of a 13-year-old Prudence Prue Bird. She disappeared from her home in Melbourne in February of 1992. On the 5th of December 2013, Camilleri was sentenced to an extra 28 years for the death of Prudence Bird. Although Camilleri did actually plead guilty, it is still really not clear what happened to Prue the day she disappeared, although Camilleri has given some very loose clues as to where her body is. To this day, her body has never been found. I just want to say thank you so much for listening to Nichole and Lauren's story. I really feel like this case is not one that is that well known or that talked about, but it's probably one of the most horrific cases in Australia. I don't think people really know the names Nichole Collins and Lauren Barry. They may know the Bega Schoolgirl case, but they don't know the names of the girls behind the horrific events that unfolded that night. Anyway, thank you again. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and I will see you soon.